Some criminals think prison is the end of the road, but for child predators, it's often just the beginning of a new nightmare. Today, we look at the craziest treatment of 5 child predators in prison. John Geoghan. John Geoghan's story begins with his time as a trusted Catholic priest, but soon spirals into a scandal that shook the Roman Catholic Church to its core. But the real twist is what happened to him behind bars. Geoghan grew up in a devout Catholic family, which led him to become a priest in 1962. However, soon after, allegations emerged that he had engaged in inappropriate behavior toward children. In the 1970s, families reported that Geoghan had made inappropriate gestures toward their children, often during church activities or in their homes. Rather than addressing these accusations, the church repeatedly transferred him to different parishes, attempting to manage the issue internally. The church's actions were driven by a misguided belief in rehabilitation and a desire to protect its reputation. Geoghan underwent psychiatric evaluations and therapy during this time, but his inappropriate conduct persisted. The tipping point came in the 1990s when more survivors began to come forward. In 1996, a mother from Waltham, Massachusetts, filed a lawsuit against Geoghan, accusing him of having made inappropriate gestures toward her 3 sons. This case, along with subsequent lawsuits, brought a flood of allegations to light. Between 1996 and 2000, over 70 individuals accused Geoghan of inappropriate behavior, leading to a series of criminal charges and civil lawsuits. In response to the mounting pressure and public scrutiny, the church finally defrocked Geoghan in 1998. A step that marked the end of his official status as a priest, but not the end of the legal battles he faced. In 2002, a pivotal moment arrived with the Boston Globe's investigation, famously known as the Spotlight Report. The in-depth coverage exposed how the Archdiocese of Boston had systematically covered up cases of inappropriate behavior, using Geoghan's situation as a prime example. The revelations were shocking. More than 130 boys had come forward with stories of unacceptable gestures, and internal church documents showed how church officials, including cardinal law, had repeatedly reassigned Geoghan despite knowing the risks. The legal consequences followed swiftly. In 2002, Geoghan was convicted of a completely inappropriate gesture toward a 10-year-old boy at a swimming pool in 1991. He received a 9 to 10-year prison sentence, which many saw as a small fraction of what his victims believed he deserved. While serving this sentence, Geoghan faced additional lawsuits, and the Archdiocese reached a $10 million settlement with 86 of Geoghan's victims. Many felt that the settlements were inadequate given the trauma and lifelong impact suffered by those affected by his inappropriate behavior, so they sought accountability from church leaders, including Cardinal Bernard Law, who had overseen many of the transfers. This pressure ultimately led to Law's resignation in December 2002. As for Geoghan himself, his time in prison was marked by isolation and fear, reflecting the disdain and anger of the public. Danger directed at him by both inmates and some guards, despite being placed in protective custody, where he lived alongside other vulnerable prisoners. He was often targeted for his past actions. Fellow inmates would shout insults, calling him Skinner, a prison term for those convicted of inappropriate behavior toward children. He frequently skipped meals to avoid confrontations, surviving on canteen food to minimize exposure to the hostile environment. While he faced ridicule from other prisoners, Geoghan's real concern, as he expressed, was the harsh treatment from certain correctional officers. He accused one officer in particular of taking pleasure in tormenting him. According to Geoghan's accounts, this officer went out of his way to remind him of his past actions, allegedly taunting him by posting news articles about his case near his cell. The situation reached a climax on August 23, 2003, when Joseph Druce, another inmate with a history of violence, managed to enter Geoghan's cell at the Souza Baranowski Correctional Center. Druce trapped Geoghan inside and attacked him in a planned assault. The incident went unchecked for several minutes due to staffing issues in the unit. Normally, 2 officers were assigned to this section, but only one was present that day, having been called away for another task. By the time other officers responded, Geoghan had suffered fatal injuries. His death was ruled as a homicide. Druce's motivation was deeply rooted in his own traumatic history. During his trial, he claimed that he felt a sense of duty to stop Geoghan, viewing him as unrepentant. Druce himself had been a victim of severe abuse during his childhood. During the 2006 trial, Druce attempted to use an insanity defense, arguing that his past experiences and mental health struggles left him with an impaired ability to control his actions. However, the jury rejected this defense, finding the act to be premeditated. As a result, Druce received an additional life sentence. But the story of inappropriate behavior toward children and its consequences doesn't end with Geoghan. The disturbing narrative continues with figures like Paul Scott. Years before his arrest, Scott, then in his 60s, was living in Wicken Fields, where he began approaching vulnerable individuals. His way of operating involved gaining the trust of families, often looking for situations where he could take advantage of that trust. Scott's actions came to light thanks to the courageous testimony of a victim, someone who had endured years of completely unacceptable behavior from him. This victim described how Scott arranged for other men to visit a residence in Bedfordshire where these inappropriate actions took place on multiple occasions. The victim mentioned that Scott would sometimes provide substances that caused drowsiness, leaving the person unable to respond. This pattern continued regularly over several years until 2009, influenced by Scott's disturbing ideas. The details of Scott's actions emerged during his trial at Luton Crown Court. The jury heard a troubling account of how Scott had planned everything, even after some of the men involved eventually asked him to stop. Yet, Scott carried on, guided by his own wishes. Despite the strong evidence, Scott denied all charges related to seriously inappropriate conduct toward vulnerable individuals during the trial, forcing the victim to relive the difficult experience in court. His refusal to accept responsibility was viewed as further unkindness. Ultimately, he was found guilty on 6 of the 7 charges for very serious inappropriate acts, along with charges related to the possession of indecent images. His sentence, 21 years in prison. Scott's legal troubles did not start with this case. Prior to his arrest for the inappropriate conduct in Bedfordshire, he had already been convicted in 2011 for possessing and distributing indecent images, resulting in a 3-year and 9-month sentence. This earlier conviction should have served as a warning, but it did not stop him from continuing his harmful conduct. During his incarceration, Scott encountered the difficult realities of being a convicted offender of this type in prison, which often led to tension with other inmates and made him a target for hostility. Initially held at Bedford Prison, Scott also went through a tense prison disturbance that put the area for vulnerable prisoners at risk. He was later transferred to Nottingham Prison. Daniel McCormack served as a Catholic priest in the Archdiocese of Chicago, primarily at St. Agatha's Parish on the city's west side. He was also a teacher and a basketball coach at a local school, roles that allowed him regular contact with young boys. This position of trust, however, became the foundation for his inappropriate behavior toward children, which spanned from the early 2000s up until 2006. Allegations against McCormack first surfaced during his seminary days in the late 1980s. But just as in the case of Geoghan, these reports were either ignored or insufficiently addressed by the church hierarchy. By 2001, the allegations had become more serious, with multiple claims of inappropriate behavior toward boys at St. Agatha. What did the church do? It assigned a monitor to oversee his behavior, a measure that would soon prove ineffective, and everyone was about to find that out the hard way. In October 2005, the Archdiocese's Professional Review Board recommended that McCormack be removed from his position due to the ongoing allegations. However, no immediate action was taken, allowing him to remain in his role for several more months. The final tipping point came when 2 boys reported that they had been subjected to inappropriate gestures by McCormack. Police arrested McCormack in January 2006, charging him with multiple counts of serious inappropriate conduct involving boys aged 8 to 12. Audits revealed that the church had ignored or mishandled over 30 allegations against McCormack throughout his career. In July 2007, McCormack accepted a plea deal, pleading guilty to 5 counts of inappropriate behavior toward children. He was sentenced to 5 years in prison, and while the plea deal spared the victims from having to testify in a public trial, it also meant that many questions about the church's cover-up efforts would remain unanswered in court. During his time in prison, McCormack showed little remorse for his actions. Reports from the time indicate that he did not apologize to his victims, missing an opportunity to express contrition in court. After serving about half of his sentence due to good behavior, McCormack was released, only to face civil commitments and ongoing legal challenges aimed at keeping him confined due to his status as a person considered a continuing risk.